So hello everyone, my name is Sibylle Schlaich and I would like to thank you very much for having me on the panel or on the symposium. Thanks especially to Sue, Wibo, Jason and Martin. So I start with my lecture. 1 second. Put this here. So together with Heike Neil, I founded Monitors Communication Design in 1994, and we develop our projects in Berlin with a team of about 15 to 20 designers. We mainly conceptualize, design, and plan wayfinding. Oh, wow. Today, I will show you some of the projects done by our team and some research and observations we have done within these projects. I hope it's okay if I refer to the symbols as pictogram in this talk, because Mr. Dreyfuss' sourcebook is called Symbol. He calls it symbols. So color type and pictograms are the graphic basis of wayfinding. In this presentation, I will talk only about one aspect of wayfinding, about the pictograms, and with a focus on gender representation. On the basis of 6 topics, I would like to illuminate the gender-neutral pictogram. We as humans want to understand each other interculturally. Understandable images that have been handed down over time and have become pictograms may help us in understanding each other. So it is not only useful to think about the topic of gender when speaking and writing, but also when designing visually, because 75% of human sensory perception is through eyes, and in contrast, only about 11 through the ears. So it's about what we see, in which context, like Manda told us before. So where, in which form, this means how, and how often we see something. So in the beginning, I would like to have a quick look at Henry Dreyfuss' sourcebook. So he has the chapter Basic Symbols, and here we see the visual representation of a male person and a female person. These two representations are defined as basic symbols, defined in Mr. Dreyfuss' personal judgment as he writes in the book or in the text. So here's the male and the female. In the graphic form section, Dreyfuss says, this section establishes the meaning of a given graphic form, a visual reference for the designer of a new symbol. It provides a basis of comparison for standardization. And he writes, the overall classification and arrangement of the symbols is therefore of necessity of a purely personal judgment. When I look at this, to me, the man on top means human being. The man and the female means man and woman, or maybe toilet. The torso may be neutral. And then I note that the representation of the human beings on this double spread is the most complex. When the sourcebook was published in 1972, I was in the 2nd grade in school. And in Germany, in Munich, the Summer Olympics were held, for which Odell Eicher, and we had more persons, so I say Odell Eicher and his team had developed corporate and the pictograms for the Olympic Games. And we heard a lot of them yesterday. That's me with my siblings, and we all are wearing the Olympic shirts. So for me, there's a parallelity between the 50 years of Henry Dreyfuss and the Olympic Games in Munich. And when we look at the graphic forms, That's how it's called in the book. For me, it's interesting the division between one person and two person. One person we see on this double spread and two persons we see on the next double spread. In this section text at the beginning of the section, he explains that often the same graphic form has different meanings in different disciplines. Then it's listed by text and referenced, but he only writes here men's toilet and not human being. And then we see on this double spread already the pictograms of 1972 from Munich. So these are all observations for me that are quite interesting, because I see the struggle already at that time between human beings, men and women. This is the next double spread with the two people on the sidebar and the torso. In the reference, the man is bigger, the woman is smaller, it becomes a group. He calls it a group. And for the toilet, he shows a pictogram with a mirror and a wash basin. In addition to the foreword by Buckminster Fuller and the introduction by Henry Dreyfuss, the source book opens with two guest contributions. One of them is written by Marie Neurath. Together with Otto Neurath and Gerd Arndt, they had developed isotype, which she explains briefly. The symbols developed for isotype are otherwise not illustrated in the source book. Maybe someone could later explain it, because I think for example, the figures for human beings would fit into the source book. Because isotype is still such an important basis for us designers today, I would like to talk about it very briefly. In the isotype days, the pictograms were primarily used for statistics. Today, we use them a lot to represent destinations. For my topic of designing a gender-neutral pictogram, it is also important and interesting to see how often and on which occasion pictograms representing female or male persons are displayed. A look in the internet today on the search for isotype shows very many male figures and only a few women depicted as brides, as maids, or as ladies. The many men, they are workers, strikers, farmers, athletes, riding horses, or they are the human beings, or they are the population. And still today, much less female figures are visually communicated than male figures. I will come back to this aspect of quantity later. Isotype differentiates women and men already with a silhouette. These are the basic figures of isotype through hair, headgear, clothes, waist accessoires. The basic figures become more specific. Assigned professions become recognizable. And the posture of the figures changes the expression. The persons get strikers. And here is the man and the group of men, or a group of human beings. These are the people. So this is interesting just to see what we learn from the beginning, that we just take it as it is. There are more men and less women, and human beings are men. An important, often sought after destination is the toilet. I call it toilet because Mr. Dreyfuss calls it toilet in his source book. Even I know in US, I think you say restroom, but here we see toilet. So this selection of pictograms identifying a toilet which Mr. Dreyfuss decided to show in his source book. So the one I have shown already was the mirror and the washing basin. Then the one combined with the dressing rooms, one was a toilet at the side and the other only the people. So as I now observe that this is really the time, the 50s until the 70s, when the struggle over how to represent the destination point toilet was already in full swing. For example, in airports at that time, there was no pictogram for the restroom because it was not chic to see something like a toilet. They just wanted to have it as text and not see the toilet itself. So this is the time, and we can see this also in the source book. On the right, there is the version not to represent the object we find in the room behind the door, but we see only a woman and a man. So this had to be learned by the users. And one of the most important international standards still today for pictograms is the ISO standard. And this is still the standard for the toilet. It's from, what was it, 1978, I think, 1980. It still looks quite the same. And it was some years after the source book published. The ISO specified or recommended how a toilet should be represented for women and men, the frontal view of a standing male and female human figure. How the figure looks like in detail is up to the designers. The figures chosen by Henry Dreyfuss were very close to the standard recommended a few years later. The woman has a waist, a skirt, and the man is wide-legged. But no longer the hairstyle is taken, and the woman was then on one leg. Another standard, we already heard of this today, is the definition of the American Institute of Graphic Arts, the so-called, I don't know whether I say it right, it's the AIGA. This is a system of 50 pictograms, which was developed in the early 70s and is still used worldwide. As far as I know, it's not developed further. And it can be downloaded free of charge from the internet, and therefore it's often used and proved. The toilet is represented, as you can see here. We see the gender differentiation through the clothing of men and women. The woman has smaller shoulders and the man wider shoulders, but the man is not wide-legged like in the ISO, and the woman has 2 legs. These are currently used pictograms for toilets at airports worldwide. The meaning of these pictograms should be clear at first glance, especially in such hedged locations. If the pictogram that represents a woman or a man is not quickly and clearly categorized, uncertainty arises here for passengers who are already under stress. And there seems to be a tendency towards more detailed pictograms at the moment. At the New Delhi airport in India, for certainty and maybe for identity reasons, photographically is helped. Depending on the context in which the toilet is located, not at airports, but in cafes or clubs, for example, there are hardly any limits to the imagination of the designers. Here it's not so tragic if someone gets the wrong door. The portrayal of only the woman based on the skirt is a one-sided. What about the many countries and cultures that have different patterns of living, where men and women wear skirts? Do these norms set in minds how something should be? The norms are spreading all over the world and shape people. like we have seen with the emojis. They shape us all, and we think they are beautiful, and we think they look good. But yeah, I think the emojis Utz has shown are quite much nicer than the ones from Apple, for example. So, but we are all shaped by these visual emoticons because we use them every day, and I really don't like it. And yet the norms are also being broken down. What happens when all men wear skirts? Like Brad Pitt, for example, or when you go to universities in Germany, more and more men wear skirts. I think we have to think new. In Bhutan, a distinction is made between short and long skirts. And thoughts on the presentation of toilet pictograms have already done numerous designers. For example, the Japanese Yuki Ota, who compiled these possibilities of representation in his book, The Pictogram Design. He published in 1987. He writes, on the left, he calls this the associative, and in the middle he calls it the gender differentiation with an additional image of the toilet. He assumed already at that time that it's not a clear message, only the frontal view of a standing male and female human figure, since this must be first learned. By the way, he is also the designer of the Running Man, the escape route pictogram. Only by adding a stroke, two areas or separate spaces are shown. But the division of toilets in two often no longer works. You can see this picture in Wikipedia. It's from Tokyo, and it's quite interesting that, how is your name? Manda already showed this group of people, and I think this is really interesting that we need more and more pictograms shown in groups. And I don't think that this purely textual solution is a good one, because this is photographed in the House of World Cultures in Berlin. So a lot of people from different cultures come here, and I think here design for all should be given. And this is a mixture between text and symbol in a museum. And I think there is not one right solution to point out the toilet. Each application has its challenge. According to the architectural specifications, the user groups, or the cultural context. If we show the object, the toilet itself, and not the user, like here, these representations are also very Western thoughts. In many countries of the world, toilets do not look like this. They rather look like this. However, today, for some people or designers, depicting the toilet itself is considered to be inclusive. Displaying the toilet itself makes sense, for example, if details about its use are to be explained, as is this the case here. This pictogram at Munich Airport should show that this toilet can be approached by wheelchair users, and also from which side. On the basis of the pictogram set of Odell Eicher and his team, we have developed this representation. But can we represent a person in a gender-neutral way at all? For the toilet, I think there is not yet the one good solution, and there are many, many reasons. I think you all know them. And when we deal with the topic of gender-neutral pictogram, it is about the design, but also again about the context and how often we see these pictograms in use. All these shapes our perception and thus our societies. we designers bear responsibility and are currently accompanying a cultural change, in my opinion. And I think it's not the best solution to divide the man and the woman. This symbol must be learned, and even this symbol has to be learned. And I would like to come back to the quantity or ratio of figures. About the same number of women and men are born on the world, on our world. Using the example of the pictograms of the AIGA, which are used very much, we see a different ratio. 10 of the 50 available pictograms of the AIGA depict persons. The other pictograms show, for example, airplanes, cabs, buses. And to really show us all persons, there are still these three above. Below, a changing table, and 2 persons, only the torso. And out of these 11 persons, I see 9 men and only 2 women. And there are scientific studies that confirm this. For example, the study of Professor Pedro Bessa at the Aveiro University in Portugal. He made a study 2005. And he looked through 49 wayfinding systems. These were 722 pictograms, 360 of them were males, and 87 were females. People are not just like this or like that. There is an endless amount in between. To be successful, however, a pictogram must be unambiguous. Thus, in the representation of women and men, signifiers are worked out that make distinguishing features unambiguous, and at the same time provide for pigeonholing. Here a contradiction arises between quick, unmistakable, and unambiguous recognizability and the avoidance of stereotypes and gender prejudices. This woman from Otto Eichers and Gerhard Joch's pictogram set is a classic, and yet she provokes us. The depiction of a woman wearing a miniskirt, in my opinion, is obsolete today. Nowhere in the world do women traditionally wear miniskirts. Is this a typically male view of representation? And what happens when the skirt gets longer and she stands on 2 legs? For the German Museum in Munich, we did a new wayfinding, and the communication is primarily done with pictograms. Again, briefly back to the subject of the toilet and the unambiguous recognizability shown left. This was in use already in the museum when we did the pictogram set new. And then our pictogram set was revised due to the NATCO report. This is an association for accessibility, which examined our new wayfinding also for people with impaired vision. And it called for a clearer distinction between men and women. This is how the subdivision of the female body came out. And I think this is something we didn't talk about that much yet, that the designer not only designs what he likes, there are so many stakeholders, clients, and people talking, discussing, and in the end, the result is a result of many, many people and a lot of discussions and associations, and whoever is passing by and needs something. And so this is why I think the source book is not the end of pictograms. We have a lot to do, And there are always new services, for example, at airports where we have to solve new pictograms. I think the source book is just the beginning. So we depict a neutrally dressed person for changing the child. That is, on the one hand, what we want to see more women, but for the sake of gender neutrality, we have to replace the few women we get to see. And we have come to a similar conclusion with the elevator pictogram. The evolution of the elevator pictogram is a study I co-authored with Anita Meyer-Walter. She is in the audition today. Hello, Anita. And our study is published by John Benjamins in 2019. And we explored the difficult perception of the two pictograms, the elevator and the toilet used in public spaces. During our work on wayfinding over the past few years, we have noticed countless different representations of the elevator pictogram. You all probably have seen the two well-known public pictograms, toilet and elevator, somewhere before. Both pictograms often visualize the same, the frontal view of a standing human figure, but the semantic information is totally different. For example, at Munich Airport, they are using text for the elevator pictogram, as you can see on the right, where they write lift instead of a pictogram, and they write bus instead of a pictogram, and they write taxi instead of a pictogram. And I think this was just an evolution over the year. We don't really know why. And I think it's not a good solution. A pictogram should work more universally than with text. And since this system is based on the work of Otto Eicher, we asked ourselves why a similar representation to that used to the 1972 Munich Olympics is not used. So left is the elevator they designed for the Olympics, and right is the elevator you can see today in the airport. And as you see, Frankfurt Airport solves it differently. This observation was our departure point into the ongoing research project. Why is the elevator pictogram altered into different representations while the toilet still remains the same? Using a male and a female standing figure as the toilet seems to be a powerful concept. Because of this dilemma, many designers have tried different representations for the elevated pictogram. And we examined these problems by using 4 different methods. Each of these approaches gave us new findings about the issue. I speak briefly only about the first point, also because I can make a small reference to the source book here. And then I jump directly to our result. To explain everything in detail would go beyond the time frame. A look, for example, in Rudolf Motley's handbook shows an overview of 13 then used elevator pictogram designs worldwide. The majority of the pictograms used 2 persons, as you can see in the upper row on the left, or the whole upper row in a way. And interestingly, in all the elevator pictograms at that time were male and female figures. And I could find 2 Henry in the Henry Dreyfuss source book. I could find 2 elevator pictograms, which are also in the Rudolf Motley handbook. So he showed these 2. And then there was 1 elevator in the source book Mr. Motley decided not to show. I think maybe he didn't think this is a good one, but just an interesting point. So even here today, there are the two standards I have shown you before for the toilet pictogram. This is the standard from ISO for the elevator, and they serve an internationally basis for many elevator pictograms. The ISO is using an elevator shaft and one person pushing the buttons, and the AIGA, the American one, emphasizes on the elevator cage and three persons forming a crowd. None is advising using a female person. Each of the four approaches gave us new findings about this issue. And always have in mind that the toilet has a stronger recognition. This pictogram overrules the elevator pictogram. So our result after several tests on the perception of the elevator pictogram is avoid gender-specific shapes. The female shape in the elevator leads to confusion. So it is more easily confused with the toilet. And we also think using gender-specific shapes in elevators is a dated representation. We think create density inside the elevator rather than using one standing single person. We think keep attention to the accessibility as well. And the main message for sure need to be the elevator. Use elements which are used in the ISO and the AIGA standards, but keep it as simple as possible. And maybe in the end, we didn't do that. And we have always the in situ checks in all our projects. We get checked by ourselves. And we realize that not ourselves, that the clients want it like that and this. And then, as I told you, the NATCO comes. So this is how it ended. So applied to our projects, there's a clear tendency. The topics gender neutrality, accessibility, and the representation of the elevator, we do not have to discuss much. But the density, the number of people in the elevator, especially after COVID, is often preferred as shown on the right. So this is an example of our work. The elevator pictogram was created for Hanover Airport, for which we are currently redeveloping the passenger wayfinding. The person standing in the elevator corresponds neither to the woman nor to the man of the toilet pictogram. Or for the German Museum, to which I had already shown the changing table earlier, we drew this elevator. The standing figures do not wear a skirt, but the top is longer than the top of the man in the toilet, so it's more neutral. And now our thoughts and suggestions on pictogram sets, which we developed for 3 hospitals. In hospitals, the center of attention is on humans. Patients stay there for a long time, longer than at an airport, for example. So pictograms play an important role in wayfinding design. For example, here in the High Mountain Clinic in Davos in Switzerland, patients come from all over the world, and many children are also treated here. The wayfinding communicates almost exclusively with pictograms. We repeat the silhouette, like the basic figure of the isotype, and we combine it with the symbols. So it becomes obvious which treatment is concerned in the respective room. From our set, I pick out only the stuff. Is this a female doctor or a male doctor? So the hairstyle and the representation of only the torso and not the entire figure supports, in our opinion, the gender neutrality. If we get closer to the person, so not showing the standing, but only the torso, we can also represent it in a more differentiated way, as you can see here in the representation of the nursing staff. And for the Charité, this is Berlin's most traditional hospital, Monitors has created an extensive pictogram set. Here too, we work with the torso for diagnosis and therapy, which also plays an important role for Henry Dreyfuss in the classification of graphic forms. The clinic management and doctors are shown gender neutral, as seen on the far right. The company Hablamos Juntos, which means in English, we speak together, with a team of researchers, has developed a universal applicable symbols for healthcare for the Spanish-speaking population in USA. 54 symbols are available for free charge on the Hablamos Juntos website. These symbols may be used in the healthcare worldwide. They have also been tested with illiterate people, and their content is a very good basis for pictograms in hospitals. But also here on the left, the Hablamos Juntos nurse is shown as a woman. The doctor is a man, and the nurse is marked with a hood, although there are also male nurses. The hood is today already an outdated representation. So this is an example that we have to go on working, and renew the pictograms and update them. And at the moment, we are working on a wayfinding for a large hospital in Germany, and for differentiation of the representation of men and women. We not only the skirt or the hair, as in the case of the women selected by Henry Dreyfuss, is important. The shoulders and the waist also play a major role. And here too, we need a gender-neutral representation of the person. We apply the gender-neutral representation, among others, for example, at the registration desk, in the elevator, or at the changing table. And as I told you before, the spatial context in which the pictograms are used is always taken into account. So this is, for example, for the pediatrics. Parents can use the toilet with their children in one room without partitions. So we do not have the lines between the human figures. So it is clear when you go into that room, there is not a wall between the toilet of the parents and the child. And then within this room is the changing table. And separate from this is an accessible toilet. But in another area, in the rehabilitation center, on the other hand, the toilets are located behind the changing rooms. Inside the showers, there's also toilets. In the back area, there are toilets, but non-accessible toilets. So maybe this is also an explanation why we have to work on these pictogram sets, because each client has totally different ideas and totally different architecture, and you have to go into this pictograms and you have to redraw them and you have to go on with them. Like I have shown the Eicher accessible toilet. At that time in 72, they didn't do that pictogram. So we have to go on and rework all of this work. So at a glance, all gender neutral full body pictograms done by monitors I have shown so far in this talk. And yeah, you can better talk about them if you see them in context or in a group of icons for sure, like we heard before. And in the end, I wanted to go back to isotype because as I'm really fascinated by the graphic strengths of the isotype characters, I wanted to see what would make them more gender neutral. And this is our try. And while I show this pictogram family from the source book of Henry Dreyfuss that I first thought works with neutral people, but it's not like that. I try to summarize my main points. First, pictograms will always be in a process of evolution as circumstances and context change. Especially for the toilet pictograms, we still have to do a lot. Second, on the one hand, we should depict female persons as often as possible. But third, on the other hand, we should show gender-neutral pictograms as often as possible. Riding the elevator, changing the child, reception desk, hiking, etc. We designers are working to ensure that these activities can be performed by all people. In specific institutions like hospitals and university, clients are often progressive and they demand gender neutrality. And here we need to find good solutions and be aware. And when I looked more closely, I discovered the nice faces drawn into these pictograms afterwards. And the funny thing is, they are really printed like that in the source book of Henry Dreyfuss. And this is really, really funny. I don't know whether there is already a research about that, who draw these nice emoticons into the heads and who decided to stay with them in the printed book. Thank you very much.